Bin Yen village nestles on the mountainside with a babbling brook flowing through. The people here are gentle and simple, living on agriculture and small business. In the middle of the village, Mr. Lamb's family stands out with their big house and vast rice fields. However, Mr. Lamb's name is not mentioned with admiration but with contempt. Everyone in the village knows Mr. Lamb. Rich by cunning and calculation rather than by charity, he was known for being stingy, looking down on the poor, and only caring about his own interests. Next to Mr. Lamb's house was a small, dilapidated house owned by Mr. Fuck, a thin but always cheerful middle-aged man. Mr. Fuch used to own a small piece of land, but when he encountered difficulties, he sold most of it to Mr. Lamb at a cheap price. Mr. Puck did not calculate, believing that helping others was a way to sow good karma. He even gave the remaining land to Mr. Lamb without taking money, only hoping for help when needed. But Mr. Lamb was not a person who cared about gratitude. That year, Mr. Fuch had to sell his land because his wife was seriously ill and the family was exhausted. After his wife passed away, Mr. Fuch raised his little daughter named Mai alone. Although life was difficult, he always taught Mai to live honestly, be grateful, and not resent others. One winter day, while carrying goods from the market, Mr. Fuch fell off his bike right in front of Mr. Lamb's house. No one in the village dared to intervene for fear of being blamed by Mr. Lamb if he affected his house. Finally, Mr. Lamb reluctantly helped, pulled Mr. Fuch into the house, and called the herbalist to examine him. But the cold attitude made Mr. Fuch feel sad. However, Mr. Fuch still thanked him and repeated his previous promise. "If anything happens to me, I hope you can help Mai a little." Mr. Lamb nodded perfunctorily, not paying attention. For him, helping Mr. Puck was already too much. A few months later, Mr. Puck passed away due to a relapse. Little Mai, then only 8 years old, stood huddled beside her father's coffin at the funeral, not knowing who to turn to. The villagers sympathized with her, but everyone was poor and no one could afford to take care of her. In that situation, Mr. Lamb decided to take Mai into his home, but this kindness did not come entirely from compassion. Mr. Lamb adopted Mai only to make her a maid, as a superficial way of repaying his gratitude. He did not want to have a bad reputation in the village, but he did not consider Mai as a member of his family. During the first days of living in Mr. Lamb's house, Mai had to get used to the cold looks and unloving treatment. Mrs. Lamb, his wife, always treated Mai like a thorn in her side, assigning her heavy tasks. Hung, Mr. and Mrs. Lamb's only son, even teased and bullied Mai whenever he had the chance. However, Mai did not complain. She remembered her father's words, "You must be grateful for what you have. Life is difficult, but as long as you keep a good heart, you will not go astray." The girl worked hard, lived in harmony with everyone in the village, and kept a smile on her face. The villagers began to like Mai, but no one could change the attitude of Mr. Lamb and his family. As the years passed, Mai grew up to be a gentle and strong-willed girl. She took care of Mr. Lamb's family out of duty, without complaint, although her heart yearned for the love she had never received from them. Memories of her father have always been Mai's greatest source of encouragement. She believes that somewhere Mr. Fuch is still watching, proud that his daughter has lived up to what he taught her. As the years passed, Mr. Lamb's family no longer maintained its position as before. Once a well-known wealthy man in the village, Mr. Lamb now faced difficulties in cultivating quality. His crops failed continuously, his debts continued to increase, and his regular customers gradually left him. The big house that used to be a source of pride has now become cold and devoid of laughter. But what hurts Mr. Lamb the most is not the economic failures, but the change in his son. Hung, the boy from years ago, has now become a grown man, but his selfish and heartless personality is increasingly evident. Hung always shows dissatisfaction with his current life, blaming his parents for not giving him a brighter future. Hung was no longer interested in farming. nor did he want to help his family. "What did you do to make our family suffer like this?" Hung said bluntly during a meal. "In the past, you always boasted that you were the best in the village, but now you're just a failed old man." Hung's words were like a knife stabbing straight into Mr. Lamb's heart. He recalled his younger years when he was proud of having a smart and clever son. He hoped that Hung would be the one to carry on the family line and bring the family up. But he himself did not realize that the way he raised Hung with selfishness and contempt for others had contributed to this character. Mai has now become a grown-up girl, witnessing all the conflicts in the family. Even though she is an outsider, she has never left Mr. Lamb's family. She still takes care of Mr. Lamb wholeheartedly, doing all the housework with patience and gratitude. Even though Mr. Lamb used to treat her coldly, Mai never complained. For her, her father's kindness in the past and what she learned from Mr. Phuc are the motivation for her to live well. One day, while cleaning her old room, Mai accidentally found an old diary in a forgotten wooden box. The cover of the notebook was faded, but the handwriting inside was still clear. It was the diary of Mr. Phuc, her father. The lines in the notebook were filled with the thoughts of a father who loved his child and always kept faith in life. Mr. Phuc wrote about the difficult days when he lost his wife, about gratitude for the little things in life. There was a passage that made Mai emotional. "No matter how others treat you, you must always be kind and forgiving, not because they deserve it, but because that is the way for you to live peacefully. Believe that kindness will always leave a mark, even in the deepest place." Reading each line, Mai felt the sacrifice and boundless love that her father had for her. She understood that Mr. Phuc's life was not only a series of suffering days, but also profound lessons about the value of forgiveness and compassion. Mai decided to change her approach to Mr. Lamb's family. She not only fulfilled her responsibilities as a maid, but also actively talked, listened, and shared with them. She encouraged Mr. Lamb and Hung to sit down and find a way to solve family problems, but the difference between the two generations made things not go smoothly. One evening, when Mr. Lamb sat absent-mindedly on the porch, Mai brought him a cup of tea. She gently said, "Uncle, I found my father's diary. He always hoped that you would remain kind not only for others but also for yourself." Mr. Lamb was silent for a long time. Mai's words made him sad. He remembered the years when he used to disregard the kindness of others, even taking advantage of it for his own benefit. Looking at Mai, the girl who was always diligent and grateful, he couldn't help but feel regretful for the way he had treated her. Memories of the promises he made to Mr. Phuc flooded back, making it impossible for Mr. Lamb to sleep that night. For the first time in many years, he sat quietly watching Mai work, clearly feeling the difference between her and Hung, his biological son. The crisis came to Mr. Lamb's family like a fierce storm without warning. Hung, with his ambition to get rich quickly, invested all his money in a big business project without careful consideration. As a result, he failed miserably, not only losing all his capital, but also incurring huge debts. Creditors began to appear at Mr. Lamb's gate with terrifying threats. Unable to bear the pressure, Hung tried every way to escape this situation. In his panic, he remembered the piece of land that Mai still kept, the only piece of land that Mr. Phuc left her. It was a small piece of land located on the riverbank, not large but very valuable because of its convenient location. Hung thought that this was the only solution to save his family. Hung approached Mai with a sweet tone. He talked about the difficult situation of the family, about her responsibility to the people who had taken her in. But Hung's eyes could not hide his greed. Mai quickly realized his true intention. "I know what you want, Hung. That piece of land is not only an asset, but also the only memory of my father. But if you need it to save your family, I will help," Mai said. Hung was stunned, not expecting Mai to agree so easily. Even though he knew he was taking advantage of her kindness, he continued to carry out his plan. The next day, Mai sold the land. She did not blame or resent him, and even gave all the money from the sale to Mr. Lamb to pay off the debt. This action stunned both Hung and Mr. Lamb. Hung felt ashamed, and Mr. Lamb felt as if he had just woken up from a long dream. "My, why did you do that? We don't deserve your sacrifice," Mr. Lamb asked, his voice choked. Mai smiled, her eyes shining with calm. "Uncle, I only did what my father would have done if he were alive. Your family took me in, and I am grateful for that." Mai's words were like a mirror reflecting Mr. Lamb's past mistakes. He remembered the times he had been selfish, the opportunities he had turned down to help others. Now, a little girl, who he had once considered a burden, was the one who reached out to save his family. Not long after, Mr. Lamb faced another crisis. His health was getting worse. Illness gradually ate away at his body, leaving him bedridden. During the days lying in the dark room, he began to look back on his life, every action, every decision. One evening, when Mai brought a bowl of hot porridge into the room, Mr. Lamb called her over. His voice was trembling, but his eyes were filled with sincerity. "Mai, I want to tell you something. All these years, I have lived a selfish life. I have hurt your father and you too. But you are still here, still taking care of me. I am truly sorry." "I'm sorry, Mai." Mai sat down next to the bed, holding Mr. Lamb's skinny hand. "Uncle, what's past? Let it be past. I never blamed you. My father always taught me that forgiveness is the best way to live a peaceful life." Tears rolled down Mr. Lamb's wrinkled face. For the first time in years, he felt his heart lighten. He looked at Mai with gratitude and admiration, as if she were not just a daughter, but an angel who had come to guide him away from his past mistakes. Mai continued speaking, her voice warm but firm. "Please live the rest of your days with compassion to set an example for Hung. It is never too late to change." Those words planted a new seed in Mr. Lamb's heart. He was determined to change, not to atone for his mistakes, but to pass on a valuable lesson to his son. The sun gradually emerged after the stormy days of Mr. Lamb's family. Since Mai sold her land to save her family from debt, a new wind seemed to blow into every corner of this house. The atmosphere was no longer as heavy as before, but instead there was a silence for everyone to reflect on themselves. Hung, who used to be immersed in selfishness and materialism, now felt empty inside. He realized that no matter how much money he had, it could not buy trust and love from the people around him. Mai's act of sacrifice touched his heart. One morning, as he passed by Mr. Lamb's room, Hung stopped in front of the half-closed door. He saw his father, weakly lying on the hospital bed, still holding a pen and writing something. In that moment, Hung clearly felt that his father's life had changed, and he could no longer continue living as before. Hung came to Mai for the first time with a sincere attitude. "Mai, I owe you an apology. I was so wrong before. Now I want to make it right, but I don't know where to start." Mai looked at Hung, her eyes shining with gentleness. "Everyone has the opportunity to start over, Hung. The important thing is that you are willing to change. Start with the smallest things, by helping those around you." From that day on, Hung gradually changed. He participated in charity activities in the village, helping the poor, especially families in difficult situations like Mai's family in the past. These actions initially made everyone in the village suspicious, but then his sincerity erased all prejudices. Mr. Lamb lay on the hospital bed, seeing the change in his son with indescribable happiness of his son, and felt lighter than ever. He knew that even though he didn't have much time left, at least he had witnessed Hung's change and Mai's forgiveness. In his final days, Mr. Lamb spent time writing his story, a story about cause and effect, about selfishness and compassion. One afternoon, when Mai brought a bowl of hot porridge into the room, Mr. Lamb called her over. "Mai, this is the letter I want to send back to you and Hung. I know I have made many mistakes in this life, but thanks to you, I have understood the value of compassion. Thank you, Mai." Mai received the letter, her eyes filled with tears. She said nothing, just squeezed Mr. Lamb's hand tightly, transmitting to him the warmth she had kept in her heart all these years. Not long after, Mr. Lamb passed away. His funeral was attended not only by his family, but also by many villagers. Hung stood in front of his father's grave, quietly rereading the letter his father left behind. In it, Mr. Lamb wrote, "Son, remember that karma is not a punishment but a lesson. Live a life of gratitude and help others. That is the only way for you to feel true happiness. Mai, I no longer have the chance to make it up to you, but I hope you will continue to maintain kindness as your father taught you." After the funeral, Hung returned with renewed determination. He began to renovate the land that his father had once taken from Mr. Poot. With Mai's help, the land became a garden full of flowers and fruits, not only a place to preserve memories, but also a place where the poor in the village could come to receive help. Mai, although not a blood relative, still lives and takes care of the family as a true member. She becomes a symbol of kindness, a person respected by everyone in the village. One morning, Mai stood in front of the garden, looking at the flowers blooming under the sunlight. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her heart, all the suffering seemed to have disappeared, leaving only peace. "Father," she whispered, "I believe you are smiling. What you taught me, I have and will always keep in my heart.